Oh, I'm sorry, this is a two-part video on free energy. Sometimes you can't do everything on one simple video. I very rarely do that. By the way, if you think I have everything that's on my notepad here that I'm saying in the video, actually I just have a few lines to always keep my mind on the correct track. My mind is always on the correct track, but I'm always usually thinking about 10 or 100 things at once. And getting back to free energy, I'd like to get into that deeper, but we first had to set up a basis of foundation. Otherwise, I'll say the word energy, and you're thinking of something completely different. I'll say ether, and you're thinking of something different. I'll say the word field, and what's a field? Well, a field is an ether perturbation modality. Yeah, it's like ice is a temperature modality of water. There's no ice in the water. Human beings love to create concepts. As an ether perturbation modality, we're talking about the release of energy, right? Stored energy in the logs here, for example, the release of which, of course, we call fire. Heat our house and cook ourselves with. And we're talking about free energy. We need to get rid of these ideas of lines. People could be talking about lines of force. There's no such thing as force. There's no such thing as a wave either. A wave is not what something is, rather than what something does. These so-called lines are what old scientists saw when they sprinkle iron filings over top of a magnet. Look at the lines! It's like, yes, I see the lines. It's just actually the fight, Mother Nature's fight, not that it's a literal fight, between the magnetic and the dielectric, or specifically magnetism and inertia, actually the acceleration towards inertia, right? That is what the dielectric is, the geometry of which is the hyperboloid, just like this neat little hourglass here is the hyperboloid, yeah? Hourglass shape. The negative image of a hyperboloid, of course, is a torus. Take the negative image of this torus, negative image of a torus is this neat little hourglass shape. So there's no waves in nature. Waves are a reference to something that is under vibration or perturbation. And that's all a so-called AC generator does. It has a temporal variable, and it is an arch form. In other words, a specific geometry. Like a ruler is a geometry with little markings on it. A geometry, most simplex geometries, they do something that human beings want. Well, you have an arch form, which is a geometry, so-called AC generator, and you change it with respect to time, and you get power generation. Oh, wow. But there's no conversion. And every science video out there, I've seen all these videos where they make super huge wind turbines, super huge diesel engines for power creation. Certain actual power grids are in small little countries are run off of diesel, for example. They'll talk about conversion, like they're converting the diesel into electricity, and that's never the case. Power from wind and these huge windmills, you're not converting wind or the kinetic energy of wind into electricity. That is never, nowhere, and ever occurring. The wind introduces the kinetics to that arch form, which is, of course, a temporal variable which manifests the power that human beings love and want. So then the question becomes, other than relying on this explosion technology, or what I've called banging rocks together, how do we introduce a temporal variable to disturb the inertia, i.e. the ether, for power generation? Let's get a little further onto that. But let's not ever talk about lines. These are constructive and destructive lines of interference between inertia and acceleration and force and motion. The two conjugate modalities of the entirety of the entire universe. And I said, did I say entirety of the entire? I'll edit that out of this video. Force of what, by what, and upon what. So we can't talk about force, we can't talk about lines, and we can't talk about waves. Let's think of things a lot more simply than that. And force is just like saying waves, for example. And of course, fields and field theory is not physics. You know, physics is matter. Field theory is not physics. It's not metaphysics, however, ultimately it is. Human beings have not understood field propulsion technology, nor have they ever defined science. No branch of science ever defined the term field, and no branch of science has ever defined the term energy. They have not. Sure it is. Energy is the ability to do work. Work? Work of what, by what, do what. What input, what output, how is it manifest, how is it transferred. fields are not physical. Neither is energy physical. Sure, we know what energy is. We'll say, ask a scientist, what's a field? Field's lines of force, a region of influence. Oh, a region of influence! That is completely illogical and ascientific. It is also, too, aspecific. You can't talk about things that are fundamentally non-physical in terms of physics. There's no physical or objective description for the ether. This is the reason why these atomists, the cult of quantum, i.e. relativity, have that to them is like talking about the devil during a church service. They literally cannot stand talk about the ether because it has no Cartesian value. It is fundamentally inert, which is what the ether is. Ether and inertia are interchangeably one and the same thing. I don't care if you use 0-point energy, I don't care if you say God, it doesn't matter. Mother Nature doesn't care what stupid human beings call it. No field, by the way, of course, is static. Any ether perturbation modality is not static because it's defined by the term perturbation itself. The ether itself is static, is inert. As is any field generation, of course, is moving, a measurable effect of force measured over time, as simply expressed by Maxwellian field equations. But no Maxwellian field equations ever tells you what a field is. It gives you effect measured in volts, amps, certain units over a period of time. Maxwellian field equations never, in no way, no how, tell you what a field is. So what's a field? Well, you refer to the Maxwellian field equations. Well, that's nice. The Maxwellian field equations never defined what energy is or what a field is. So we have to look at energy differently. Once again, we have to see the ether as the definition of inertia, non-Cartesian pure potential. The field, or what the Greeks call kora, i.e. This inertia, this ether, this 0-point energy. So free energy only requires this temporal disruption geometry, but we don't need the specific so-called AC generator for that disruption. We can use, and what that geometry is, it's to be a totally different type of power generation unit, which doesn't require kinetic input. We only need to use the natural expression of the magnetic field and its temporal lag, i.e. this L'Amour frequency, this geomagnetic precession, which has a temporal lag between the North Pole and the South Pole, to induce a temporal lag in a specific field structure. By the way, as I've also too said many countless times, and it makes things really simple, even explaining it to a child. Child says, what's an AC generator? Why does it work? Well, and you have to explain to a child what a magnet is. Yeah, plane of inertia is on the inside, right in the middle. We have just like the pinch point on this this hyperboloid right here. You know, when I turn the hourglass here, we see the sands disappearing from here. That would be discharge. And over here we have the sands appearing. That would be analogous to charge. We have time, negative time here, positive time here, vice versa, depending on how you want to look at it. Right here in the middle we have no time. Yeah, we have nothing. Time, just like the center of a clock. If you rip the hands off a clock and it's still rolling, you can't tell the time, right? But something is still moving. The release of that energy or inertia is innate to inertia itself, just as illumination is innate to light, extrinsic attribute. You'd have to explain to a child how a magnetic field is, the plane of inertia, the toroidal field of the expression of magnetism. You say, well, Billy, now that I've explained to you what a magnet is and what magnetism is, the toroidal geometry of centrifugal force and motion, yeah. The so-called AC generator is an arch form, and by the way, listen closely, the so-called AC generator, which is not a generator at all, is an inside-out magnet. Human beings took what we knew about a magnet, we turned it inside out. Where magnetism is on the inside, the plane of inertia of the coils are on the outside. We rotate this inverse magnetic field geometry, this arch form, with respect to time, and we get what human beings want to power their hair dryers and TV sets, which is power generation. Oh man, that makes it really simple. And it is really simple. You have to first understand what magnetism is and the toroidal geometry that defines magnetism. And magnetism is, of course, no different than a dielectric, just as ice is no different than water, just as steam is no different than water. The magnetic field is the loss of energy or inertia manifests as a three-dimensional force vector, i.e. centrifugal divergence, extrapolated three-dimensionally, also too four-dimensionally, and there enters in the Lamore frequency, yeah, i.e. geomagnetic precession, manifest three-dimensionally, we have this toroidal geometry, which is the magnetic field. People say, what is space, by the way? Space is the air inside that toroidal balloon. Yeah, but there's just no air. Ultimately, that space is nothing. Space is no different than a shadow. Space has no properties. And I will point out to people, of all the people that think they know so much about Tesla, they'll quote Tesla endlessly. Let me point out something really important to you. The only time Tesla gets close to foaming at the mouth like a mad dog is against relativity's premise that space has properties. You can do things to space, you could warp it and twist it, or that space acts upon other things. That of all the writings that we have access to of Nikola Tesla, that's the only time where Nikola Tesla gets close to foaming at the mouth. And he rants on it quite extensively. I have all his little rants against space. Space has no property. Space doesn't act upon things. Space is nothing. Space is absolutely no different than a shadow. A shadow's not a thing. Shadow's an absence of something. We think a shadow's a thing. Well, you stand in a shadow, you get cold. A shadow's an absence of light. A privation is not a principality. That is a very fundamental, fine, nuanced philosophical point a lot of people don't understand. A privation is not a thing. However, we have a word for it, therefore it must be a thing. Well, no, it's not, but that's a matter for another discussion. So getting back to free energy or inertia, this non-Cartesian pure potential, what the Greeks called the kora, i.e. the field. Free energy, as we all ideate it generally, only requires this temporal disruption geometry. And that's all, of course, an current AC generator does. All so-called energy is the dissipation of energy, and this so-called energy is the charge on the system. This charge on the system is the torsion modality of the energy transfer. The energy transfer of what? From inertia to the system, and part of that arch form is another type of arch form, which is a conductor system for the charge. This so-called AC generator, which doesn't generate charge, rather manifests it, much have an arch form for the transference and guidance, just like we have when you go to a theme park. You got these little silly gates you got to go in. There's a long line to ride the roller coaster. You know, power transmission cable is no different than a gate system, you know, to weed people through like cattle. Bah! I was trying to make a sheep noise there. My throat's a little dry. It didn't come out right, huh? I'll edit that out of this video. So now that we know a field is just an ether perturbation modality, let's talk about moving charges. All moving charges, of course, are dielectric, conventionally incorrectly called electrical charges. And Charles Brody-Steinmetz's Electrical Discharges, Waves, and Impulses, I think on page 14 said that, and this book was published in 1917, said that all current field theorists of his time confused electricity. Electricity is the hybrid consubstantiality between dielectricity and magnetism. Kind of like, not that I know drink mixing at all, like a margarita is a mix of, I don't know, some sort of something and a liqueur. You know, you mix two things, you get, this is a margarita. You basically, and I was trying to make an analogy, even though I don't know anything about alcohol and I don't drink. Everybody thinks electricity is kind of like a margarita. A margarita, I mean, I don't know how many components are in a margarita. I think it's like at least two, right? You bring these two things together and you have a margarita. Electricity is not an autonomous field modality. It has a cyclic rate, but what it is the consubstantiality of the byproduct phi times psi equals Q and Planck of electrification between magnetism and dielectricity, and there's this thing that we call electricity. Charles Brody-Steinmetz, way more intelligent than Nikola Tesla, said this in his book in 1917. That's over 100 years ago. He said even then they were totally confused. Well, guess what? They're just as confused now, even more so. We think electricity is a thing, and it's not. It is, but it is not a thing in and of itself. Neither is gravity, by the way. Gravity is a misunderstanding. That's non-point source mutual mass acceleration towards a null pressure point between two or more masses. So-called gravity, of course, the phenomena does exist. Nobody's in denial of this, but it's like, well, what is that? Well, that's an autonomous field modality. Every branch of science admits they have no idea what the hell gravity is, and they can't understand instantaneous action at a distance. And the reason why they can never fundamentally understand it, and never will, is because they're atomists, mathematicians. The religion of mathematics and physical mathematics is they think everything is physical, everything is quantizable. And that is not the case of fields, and it's certainly not the case of the ether. But once again, ether is this word that's no different than saying Satan in the middle of a church service. The word ether is literally like that, yelling out the devil in the middle of the pastor's sermon on Sunday. It literally is that bad. They don't believe in it because they're mathematicians. They don't believe in anything you can't count, can't quantify. That's what I call the cult of bumping particles. But anyway, we're banging rocks together. We're using explosion technology for the generation of power. This is no different than the explosion technology in our rockets, and our car systems, and even our electrical cars are not actually electrical. They're just using explosion technology conversion, from coal power or nuclear or whatever. And it's like, oh, my clean energy, my electric car. It's like, no, it's not. Your car is clean. However, it's not. Those lithium batteries and the mining of same is incredibly dirty. We're still banging rocks together like cavemen. We're using explosion technology on every level. We have to move away from explosion tech to implosion tech. And by implosion tech, this means we must understand dielectricity, must understand inertia, must understand the ether, which is no different than talking about inertia. And counterspace. Counterspace is really a very stupid word. I'll certainly admit we could come up with another word. We could say 0 point. I don't care what you call it, but implosion tech. So anyway, these moving electrical charges generate magnetic fields, of course, like the magnetic field around an AC power line, because the moving charges release energy from inertia to the ether, and they actually create this loss of energy or inertia, either from the dielectric or from the ether itself in the AC power generation, where we actually have magnetic fields, which of course is demonstrable around any AC power line, which of course that which human beings call the magnetic field, these moving charges, these electrical charges, which is the consubstantiality of dielectricity and magnetism, in the guidelines of the arch form of the transmission of this power, must necessitatively produce magnetic fields. And then of course we have inductance, and then we actually have lag, and we have heat generation where you can't raise the amperage up too high. And most AC power lines will blow out. It's the reason why lightning strikes cause issues on the lines where we reach saturation effect. Even Eric Dollard talks about the saturation effect. So-called free energy is this temporal disruption of the geometry of ether or inertia, which is all any of these AC generators actually accomplish. And we need to think inversely to the explosion technology. What that geometry is, if I said I knew, I would either be dead or I would be disappeared away from somebody. I'm not going to pretend and say something illegitimate and fantastical, which is incorrect. I'm not interested in making videos like that. I spend an enormous time thinking about it, but this is the answer. Just because I don't know what the answer is doesn't mean I can't say, well, the answer is in this box right here. I know it's none of these others. I know the answer is in this box right here because it's called implosion tech. This box is called implosion tech. This box is called field propulsion tech, whatever we want to call the box. I know it is there. What specifically is inside there, I don't know. I don't know the specific field geometry, but I know that is the answer. I know that is the answer. This retroductive methodology can figure out a lot of stuff before knowing directly the existential objective specifics of the actual answer. That's one of the great benefits of retroduction loss methodology, the Pythagoreans. So, likewise, as I've said even a few minutes ago, any and all AC power, arch forms is an inside-out magnet. This quest for free energy, which is a crude approximation for saying 0 point or a zero input temporal disruption of inertia. We have to get away from this explosion technology ideation of free energy. We're talking about zero input temporal disruption of inertia, and the only way to get zero input temporal disruption of inertia is by using the precessional lag. Look up geomagnetic precession, look up L'Amour frequency, don't take my word for it. Using this to apply to a new type of arch form, which is not explosion technology arch form, which is everything currently today. All these arch forms take advantage of kinetic input to use that specific arch form for power generation. Instead of kinetic input, which is no different than saying explosion technology. We want power over here. We all know that. Everything currently we have is kinetic input, arch form, power output, which we all want. We all still want the power output, but instead of having kinetic input, we would not have kinetic input. We would have a new type of arch form, but instead of kinetic input, we'd have precessional lag. This temporal lag which exists between the North Pole and South Pole of any magnetic field. What this means is free energy. The elimination of kinetic input into a new type of arch form is the definition of free energy. That is the answer. What does that arch form look like? I've spent an enormous amount of time thinking about it. I will not pretend or lie to you what that arch form is. I know it exists. I know it must exist because I do fully understand the temporal lag of a magnetic field. You can say it's egotistical. I don't care what you say. I am the one person on earth that actually does understand what magnetism is, what a magnet is, and what the magnetic field is, and its attributes. Look up Lamour frequency. Look up geomagnetic precession. There is a temporal lag between poles of a magnet, between the North Pole and the South Pole. Proportionality of 1 to phi. This means we can eliminate out the kinetic input of our current arch forms for power generation. We still want the power generation, obviously, which is all we care about. So now we have an unknown arch form. This unknown arch form has no kinetic input. What it has is the knowledge of fields, the precessional lag of the magnetic system between polarities to take advantage of introducing the temporal variable which we are currently using for kinetic input into an arch form for the generation of power. And that is the answer to free energy. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Let me know if you want to contact me or email me. My information is below in the description. I read every comment, even the really mean ones. Lux Veritas. I hope you have a lovely weekend. Goodbye.